Well, good evening, family. We're in a series we're calling I Will. It's based on a book of the same name by Dr. Thom Rainer. So far, we've looked at a couple of revolutionary commitments that need to be a part of those who claim to be followers of Christ, on a part of his church. The first was simply the commitment that says, I will worship. I hope you took that study to heart and that you're putting into practice the ideas we discussed, and you've seen a difference in your times of worship. The I will we discussed last week was I will serve. In that too, I pray that you have been thinking on ways that you can serve, that you've committed to those 90 days of no complaining and just maybe 2 hours a week towards serving someone other than yourself. I know that as a staff, we're actively searching and planning for ways that we as a church can reach out in service to our community, but I want you to do the same individually as well. Tonight, we're going to partner up two other I wills into one. As followers of Christ, as Christians, there are two things that I can say for a fact that as a Christian that you possess. Okay, the first is, you possess things, money, cars, houses, retirement accounts, golf clubs, fishing poles, you name it. We've all got stuff. We've all got money. We've all got stuff. Maybe a little, maybe a lot, but we all possess something. Call it stuff if you want. Secondly, as a Christian, you also possess the gospel of Jesus Christ. If you didn't possess that, you wouldn't even be a Christian. So what we're going to deal with tonight is our attitude toward those two things that we possess. So we're going to call this one, I will give and go. For the first part of this discussion, you're going to dive into the Sermon on the Mount. Now, I know volumes of books and articles have been written on Jesus' sermon that's recorded in Matthew 5 through 7. I know I'm blessed every time I reread his sermon, and I always come away with something more each time I do. His teaching is radical. It's counterculture for the time. It's quite frankly amazing. And the crowds of his day felt much the same way. As a matter of fact, when he finishes his sermon, the crowds say this in Matthew chapter 7, verse 28 and 29. It says, and when Jesus finished these sayings, the crowds were astonished at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one who had authority, not as their scribes. The subject matter that Jesus discusses in his sermon, it's very pointed and it's very convicting then and now. And about halfway through the sermon, he begins to talk about money. And just like today, you can almost sense the discomfort in the crowd. People start staring at the ground, they start fiddling in their purse, they start shuffling their feet. And yet Jesus looks at them and he says, in verse 19 to 21 of chapter 6, he says, don't lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves don't break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. These are stunning words. They're amazing words. They're convicting words in the first century as well as in the 21st. Jesus says if your focus is on collecting material wealth, then your focus is wrong. He's not saying that saving is bad, but he's focusing on the heart issue of money. And if we aren't to collect, then the obvious corollary is that we are to give. And as we give, we are actually collecting treasures in heaven. Simply put, our giving has a positive and an eternal consequence, but if we don't give, our possessions have no lasting value. They're merely subject to theft and erosion, as he says. They'll all be gone. But Jesus doesn't stop there. He goes on to say that you will either have him as Lord or your money. If your focus is money, then Jesus isn't your Lord. It's just that simple. We too often want to tiptoe around this issue of money. Maybe, we're uncomfortable with the topic. I know sometimes it makes me uncomfortable to preach on that topic. There are those who say, oh, that preacher, they just want more money. That's all they ever talk about is money, 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 right? But Jesus taught on it, and he taught on it quite often because he knew it really reaches down into the heart of who we are. It's an issue of great magnitude, an issue of the heart. So instead of listening to me tonight on the subject, I'm going to let you guys really dive in and discuss it together. But what I do want to say is this. Giving is a true indicator of the heart. Giving is an indicator of being that true church member that God has called us to be. People who are giving and generous, cheerfully so. See 2 Corinthians chapter 9 for that. But we're generous with our possessions, with our money, and as a church, as a member, as a Christian, it's time to give. But he also calls us to be giving and generous with something else, the gospel. The American landscape today is dotted from coast to coast with churches of our Lord that are simply dying. Churches that used to tout memberships in the 200 and 300s are now struggling to see 40 to 50 walk through their doors. And as they decline, and we can see it right here around us, just look around Pensacola, you know what I'm talking about. Our tendency is often to look for someone or something to blame. That's the preacher's fault. It's the elder's fault. It's the government's fault. It's this new generation's fault. And none of those is the cause. Hardly ever. The reality is that the church's decline is the collective result of individuals within each church who have simply decided they will not go. And in so doing, church becomes kind of a religious country club instead of one obedient to the Great Commission of Jesus. We're all familiar with Acts chapter 1, verse 8. After the resurrection, right after Jesus ascends back to heaven, he leaves his last words for his followers right before he ascends. He says this in verse 8 of Acts chapter 1. He says, "You will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the end of the earth." And that was that, Jesus' last words, and he ascended. But his final words are important. Now, I certainly don't want to minimize missions, okay? The importance of evangelism beyond our own communities. It's what's represented in Jesus' words as Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. But tonight I want to focus on Jerusalem. Why Jerusalem, you say? Because it's the immediate community of the church. And in far too many churches, it is the most neglected part of our mission field. In a recent study, Rainer noted that less than 10% of the churches in the United States are growing at the pace of the community around them. Simply stated, most of our churches are losing ground in our communities, and the reason is simple: we're not going. And we got plenty of reasons. We got plenty of excuses why we don't, right? I mean, some will say, "Well, it's not my spiritual gift," right? Really? Mercy is listed as a spiritual gift. Does that mean if it's not my gift that I don't have to extend mercy to anyone? No, I don't think so. Nice try. Or some will say, well, that's the staff's job. That's the preacher's job. That's the youth minister's job. That's the elder's job. Everybody knows that. Actually, biblically, that's not even close to true. Biblically, it's the evangelist, the minister's job to prepare the saints for ministry, to equip them for ministry, which ministry includes evangelism. Sorry, nice try. People say, I don't have time. Do we really want to do an audit of our time in a week? Time in front of the TV, time on social media, time at sporting events, time at the beach, time playing golf. That one's not going to work either. Oh, some will say, well, I've got this fear of imposing my beliefs on somebody else. If I was about to step on a rattlesnake, I sincerely hope you'd impose on my right to walk where I want. Can you honestly imagine the Apostle Paul standing up on Mars Hill and saying, guys, I really don't want to offend anyone or make anyone uncomfortable with what I believe? No, I can't either. Some will say, well, I'm an introvert. Let me tell you something. I am too. Every psychological test I've ever taken, and I'm pretty sure throughout the years I've spent in college, I'm pretty sure I've done most of them. But every single time it tags me as an introvert. You need to understand, being introverted has absolutely nothing to do with talking to people. If your neighbor's house was on fire and they were inside asleep, would you sit there and watch them burn because you are introverted and it makes you uncomfortable to speak to people? I don't think so. You see, really, when you sit back and you think about it and you listen to those excuses, none of them really hold water. But we offer them up anyway. But maybe the actual reason we don't go is simply because we really don't believe in lostness. We don't share the gospel because really deep down we don't believe people need the gospel. You know, suppose you see someone walking on a dry lake bed. I mean, there was once water in it, but not anymore. It's dry, it's hard, it's crusty. Would you try to save someone from drowning by diving into the dirt? Of course not. You know they aren't drowning, so they don't need saving. You know, before we ever go, we have to settle this issue in our hearts. Do you really believe those who are not Christians need saving? Do you really believe that those without Christ are lost? You know, I kind of think Jesus makes it perfectly clear in Luke 19:10. He says, the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. You know, I have this fear that in most of our churches, we only give lip service to the doctrine of lostness and to the belief that Christ is the only way to salvation. And if we have no deep down beliefs in either of those truths, we simply won't go. We'll see people as drowning in a dry lake, and they really don't need our help. You know, Peter and John were once told to stop talking so much about Jesus. You know, oh, how I wish that was a problem our elders had to deal with on a regular basis. You know, they get on the phone and call each other, well, we better call for another prayer meeting. We got 3 more in jail because they won't shut up about Jesus. But in Acts 4, you know, Peter tells these people who tell him to hush. In verse 19, he says, whether it's right in the sight of God to listen to you rather than to God, you must judge. For we cannot but speak of what we have seen and heard. So how do we get there? To the point where we cannot but speak. The first thing goes even back to when we talked about I will worship. Spend time in prayer. Pray for opportunities. Pray for them all the time. Before you go to work, before you go to a sporting event, before you go home, wherever you're going, pray for the opportunities to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with someone who needs it. I'm going to step out on a limb here, and I'm going to guarantee God here. I'm going to guarantee that if you pray for the opportunity to share the gospel with someone, God will give you that opportunity. But be prepared. When he does give you that opportunity, be prepared to speak. The second, simply invite people to church, to connect groups. And so, will people really come to church if we invite them? You know, that's what we think. We think, well, nobody wants to come to church. Nobody will come if I ask. You know, but statistically, the statistics say the exact opposite. Rainer's team did a study, and it's echoed by a study done by Barna, and both came to the same conclusion. 8 out of 10, 80%, 8 out of 10 people who do not attend church would attend if someone invited them. If you invite them, they will come. 8 out of 10. If you don't, they won't. You know, there's one simple way to make sure someone will always reject the gospel, and that's to never invite them to it. You know, as a church, it's time for us to go. You know, if you're a typical church member, you may not do much to share the love of Christ with your community, with your neighbors, with your friends, or even with your family. And you know, I think one of Satan's greatest tactics is to convince Christians that they can be comfortably silent. I firmly believe it's a sin to be silent when we've been commanded to speak. It's time for us to be generous with our possessions. It's time for us to be generous with the message of Jesus. You know, one person in one church can make a difference. One member committed to giving and going can be a spark that ignites a fire that would run through the course of an entire membership. One person, it may be you. You know, it's time for all of us, all believers, to acclaim these words without hesitation and commit and say, I will give and I will go. God bless and enjoy your study together tonight.